So we're going to continue hearing from Kevin Sheils now about the dramatic statement, well, including claims by the Post Office investigator Suzanne Winter that the overclaims were generated by claiming non-existent pension allowance files, and understand how he came to the conclusion to prosecute and whether he considered any alternative possibilities such as keying errors or errors in the Horizon system. Let's jump into the inquiry.
Going over the page, please, we can see the summary sheet prepared by the PSNI, and this lists the nature of the offence, and we see there theft. And scrolling down a little, please, the officer in the case, Suzanne Winter, investigation manager. And going over 2 more pages, please, we have Miss Winter's report. About halfway down the page, the subject is theft of post office monies, limited monies at Clannabogan Post Office by Mrs. Maureen McKelvey, subpostmaster of Clannabogan Post Office. 2/3 of the way down, we have the date that this report was submitted, which is December 2002. And then going to page 6 of this document, please, there is a précis of facts, which is authored by Miss Winter. The first page here sets out some background to the paying out of pensions and allowances to members of the public by the Post Office. And towards the bottom, the penultimate paragraph here on this page, there is an explanation of foils in this way. Customers who collect a pension or allowance normally receive payment by order book. The order book contains a number of detachable foils on which is printed the date of payment, amount of payment, pension or national insurance number, group number. The detachable foils are attached to a counterfoil which is fastened to the cover of the order book. Payment can only be made on or after the due day of payment unless payment in advance has been authorised. When the order book is presented at the post office, both the counterfoil and the detachable foil are date stamped. The detachable foil is torn from the order book and the customer paid the sum stated on the foil. The detached foil is retained in the post office for accounting purposes. Then follows an explanation of the way pensions and allowances are accounted for weekly. And it says here, pensions and allowances paid at the counter are summarised and accounted for weekly. Many post offices prepare a daily summary of paid pension and allowance foils. Daily and or weekly summaries are prepared by sorting all paid foils into their respective group in ascending order of value. Each group of foils is then machine ad listed for the total for each group, carried to the bottom of the machine listing to produce a summary of all group totals. Group totals from all machine listings for that accounting week are entered onto the form P2311BMA. Grand totals for the individual group numbers are summarised on the pensions and allowances summary, P2311MA. The grand total for all pension and allowances is then entered in the payments table of the weekly cash account of the post office. On completion of the weekly cash account, all paid pension and allowance foils and form P2311BMA are dispatched to the paid order unit in Lisahally, Londonderry. Did you understand this summary to be saying that the amounts on the various physical foils were entered into the system, which resulted in an ad list being created, which gave both a total of each group of foils and then a summary of the total for all groups?
Yes.
The next step was then to enter all the group totals for the accounting week onto the form 2311BMA, or P2311BMA, and the physical foils for the week were sent with that form to the paid order unit. That's what the summary here is saying, isn't it?
Yes.
And the next paragraph then explains the checks that were conducted by the paid order unit, which were conducted on a rota basis. And about halfway down that paragraph. It says, whilst conducting a routine rota check of the paid pensions and allowances foils dispatched by Clannabogan Post Office, overclaims were identified on each of the weeks examined, varying in value from 40 pence to £148. The overclaims were generated by claiming non-existent pension and allowance foils.
I mean, the issue here is the quality of the investigation, isn't it? There is a lot of weight and a lot of evidence being provided from Suzanne Winter and her interpretation, so it is clearly looking like a major post office failing here. But these clear statements, which don't seem to be totally backed up by the evidence, okay? The overclaims were generated by claiming non-existent pension and allowance falls. Well, that's straight up theft if that's happening, isn't it? But to make a statement like that, you need hard evidence to back up a claim like that, and that's what we've not seen so far.
Pausing there, when you read that last sentence, the overclaims were generated by claiming non-existent pension and allowance foils. Did you stop to ask whether this was the correct conclusion to draw as to the discrepancies which had been identified by the paid order unit?
Sorry, repeat the question.
So the last line here draws a conclusion as to how the overclaims were generated. And it says the overclaims were generated by claiming non-existent pension and allowance foils. So what the paid order unit had highlighted to the post office, according to this summary, was that there was a mismatch between the physical foils for the week and the figures on the P2311B MA. Yes?
Yes.
Did you understand from the summary given to you at the time that the figures appearing on the P2311BMA were generated in part by someone in branch putting in figures from the hard copy foils, and in part by the computer, which generated an ad list? Was that your understanding from this summary?
Yes, that the information was inputted via the computing system, which gave a balance at the end of the week, and which was to match, that figure should have matched the number of foils.
So you do need the evidence there, clearly, because actually at that point there could be many possible conclusions. It's a keying error, because we're talking about quite small amounts of money. It's a computer bug. So this isn't lying at Kevin Sheils' door, this is lying at the original post office investigation, which, when we've heard discussed about, left a lot to be desired. But they have drawn the conclusion that actually this is a deliberate attempt to make up non-existing pension files, in effect to steal pension money, which doesn't exist. And to come up with that, we're yet to see any conclusive evidence from the time which actually identified that it was that versus a keying error versus a computer bug.
Have been paid, or stubs, counterfoils.
So with that in mind, the conclusion that is stated here, the overclaims were generated by claiming non-existent pension and allowance foils. I'm asking whether you stopped to question whether that conclusion was justified on the basis of the summary, because there were two alternative explanations for the mismatch, weren't there, apart from a purposeful overclaim. Either an error on the part of the person entering the figures from the physical foils, or an error on the part of the computer system generating the ad list. Would you agree with those two possible alternatives?
Well, yes, I would agree.
Was this something you considered when you read the conclusion in the terms put here, which had been reached by the post office investigator, that the claims were generated by claiming non-existent pension and allowance foils?
No, I didn't reach that conclusion.
I mean, that could be potentially a first mistake. I mean, fair enough. I mean, they've come to the conclusion based on the evidence at the post office. But there's a potential opportunity to catch it by exploring other possibilities and saying, what is your evidence actually that it isn't a mistake or it isn't a computer bug? Whether the post office would have been able to provide any more than written statements refuting that at the time, because clearly there was some evidence existing in terms of bugs, certainly at the Fujitsu offices where they were taking the Horizon helpline calls. That does leave a possible avenue of investigation unexplored, although it is probably reasonable to suggest that he would have imagined that that would have been explored by not only the police but also the post office during their initial investigations.
Simply for the fact that the allegation was that Mrs. McKelvey was stealing the money. So it wasn't errors. There were no errors highlighted in terms of the computing system or personal errors.
But just at this point, did you consider these two alternative explanations for a mismatch between the figures on the physical foils and those on the form it was being compared to?
No, I didn't.